Hello, everybody. Welcome along. And it is a great honour to have opposite me on Skype former Premier League Player of the Year, European Golden Shoe winner, England striker, Kevin Phillips. Kevin, how are you, sir?
I'm very well, thank you.
What wins in a fight out of European Golden Shoe and Premier League Player of the Year then?
If you really had to push me as you are, I'd probably have to just say that the European Golden Shoe probably just takes it. Although, winning the Player of the Year in the Premier League and the Golden Boot that season, took some doing, obviously, in a side that finished seventh. But, winning the European Golden Boot, obviously, getting it against some of the players that I did, probably just tops it.
Sensational. Look, I'm sure everybody that's watching this has seen you play, but I'm always interested in the player's perception. So how would you describe yourself as a player?
Well, I think the phrase "fox in a box" has been used an awful lot over the years, and still, I wouldn't say it's used as much now as it was back in the day when I played, but I would describe myself as diminutive. If I had to liken myself to any kind of striker around at the moment, albeit that he's a far better player than I am, but a sort of type of Sergio Aguero, short, stocky, always
Has he ever
trying to
won the
find
European
space.
Golden Shoe?
I don't know, actually. He may well have, but he's not English, so I've never really took much notice. But, he scored some awesome goals. But, yeah, I would say, obviously very sharp over 10 yards, always trying to find that yard of space in and around the box to try and get that shot off, and just trying to be a nuisance, really. I remember Martin Keough once after his game calling me a nuisance. So if he's calling me that, then I'll take that.
There you go. Right. So in the interests of politeness, this is a championship channel, and we must acknowledge that, Kevin, you spent all of your peak years, age 26 to 33, in the Premier League, and we've touched on it a little bit, but I'm interested in Watford and Sunderland, and then ridiculously, when we thought you might have been all done, another 4 promotions after the age of 33. Incredible. So let me take you to Watford, and this is late 94, straight into the team, 9 goals in 16 games. Next season you get 11, but team gets relegated, Glenn Roeder gets sacked, and you have a bad injury. So at 22, in the knowledge, you don't find it particularly hard to score at second tier level. You're now on the sidelines injured, heading for the third tier. What is your mindset during the recovery period, with the tension between the fact you can score at that level, but you've dropped down and you're badly hurt?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, of course, the route that it took me to get into professional football was set me up really well for my career, and certainly my first stint at Watford. So, I had to overcome a lot of hurdles to get to where I was at that stage at Watford. Losing my dad as well was a huge influence. I didn't really want to continue to play football when I lost him after the first season. I joined Watford, scoring 9 goals in 15 games. It didn't start particularly well because I signed in November. Didn't break into the team till February. So, that start was awesome. I had to deal with the problems in the summer with my dad passing. And then we start the next season with Glenn Roeder. He gets sacked, like you said. I picked up an injury and it kept me out for a year, which was probably the most frustrating injury I had in my whole career and the longest I'd ever been out. And then we get relegated and having to sit at home and watch it, not being able to being able to do anything about it. But knowing the fact that, if I hadn't got injured, I'd like to think that, the goals that I knew I could score at that level that would have given us an opportunity to stay in the league. But Glenn went, we got relegated. Then Graham Taylor comes in, I come back, scored a few goals. I think I may have scored a hat-trick in my second game back, or my first. Yes. Yeah. So, I thought, we're off and running again, delighted to be back. And then we got to the end of that season and my contract ran out. So, my state of mind was, I think that, in my short time that I'd had at Watford, me and my agent felt that I deserved a better contract, but so did the club. So they did offer a new one, Graham Taylor, but we just felt at that stage it wasn't what we were quite looking for. We felt we deserved maybe a little bit more, so we couldn't agree. And unfortunately, my mindset was, well, let's go and find another club, and that was it.
Can you talk a bit about Graham Taylor, Kevin? Because I think a lot of people, after the awful treatment he got, with the newspapers and the England job and everything, he's a bit kind of looked down on. And then I used to hear him summarising on games, and he just sounded really, really wise. And then obviously a few years later, he goes back and has another crack at what was Graham Taylor like?
For me, it's fantastic. He was great. It wasn't his doing. I think it was coming from the board. He wanted to keep me at the football club. He made that very clear. But it was great. You know, when he was reinstated as the manager, of course, he was a legend at the club. And him and Luther Blissett and Kenny Jackett was there at the time, who took over as interim manager. You know, they're three legends of Watford Football Club. So to be able to have the chance to work under him, and of course, you know, with his England exploits as well, just to pick his brains, his intelligence of the game was second to none. You know, I think at that stage, there wasn't many out there that had more, knowledge about the game than what he had. So as a young player, you have to tap into that. And I certainly did that. And, the conversations we had on the field and off the field, stood me in good stead for the rest of my career. And, of course, it was a shame when his passing come, but he actually lived not too far from where I am, in the Lichfield areas. He was living in Sutton Coldfield, not too far from Villa Park. So I bumped into him quite a few times, but he was an extraordinary guy and just so passionate about football.
Brilliant. Right. I'm going to out myself now as an Ipswich Town fan. So you're going to know exactly where this next question is going. So the contract's running down. Sunderland have just built this new stadium and they've just been relegated. This is ahead of 97-98. You signed for Sunderland, but there's this myth, and I'm sure that it's been exaggerated over the years. There's this myth that you were extremely close, not just close, but extremely close to signing for my team Ipswich, and then not doing it and going and scoring 1 million goals for Sunderland. What happened? Speak to Ipswich fans here.
Yeah, well, listen, I don't mind saying, I've said it many times. I had agreed a personal contract with Ipswich Town. We made the journey, me and my agent, up to Portman Road. We had a tour of the grounds, and I believe at the time they trained, whether they still do, right opposite the ground on the training pitches there. So we had a tour around there. George Burley was brilliant, keen to get us on board. We agreed a personal contract with David Sheepshanks, who was the chairman at the time. And I was very excited about joining the football club because, I was a bit of a homeboy at the time. And having lost, as I said earlier, having lost my dad not so long, I didn't want to be moving too far away from home. My wife was expecting our first child. So we'd kind of already identified an area where we wanted to live in the area of Bury St Edmunds, which was pretty halfway between Ipswich and Stevenage. So, I could, I was near home, and obviously I was near, not too far from Ipswich. So I felt that could work. But then, then the news came through that, the two clubs couldn't agree a fee. And, the only way they could do it was to go to a tribunal. And I believe at the time, either Ipswich or Watford had a player going to a tribunal and for another reason. And I understand that you couldn't have two players going to a tribunal at the same time.
I think it was Tony Vaughan to Man City, Kevin.
Okay. Well, there you are. It well could be. I didn't know that. But all I knew that, I was going to have to wait, I think, between a week and 2 weeks for that to resolve itself. And then for mine to go to tribunal. And I wasn't prepared to do that because I'd made it clear. That means I'd have had to go back to Watford and train, knowing that, I didn't really want to be there. I'd made my mind up that I wanted to join Ipswich. And so, I was left with a dilemma. What do I do? Do I wait 2 weeks at home and not train? Or do I try and find a solution? And, at the end of the day, me and my agent were sat in a car at Portman Road. And I said, listen, I don't want to wait. What other options are there? And he just said, well, I'll give Peter Reid a call because I know for a fact that he likes you. When you played against him up at Roker Park earlier on in the season, he was impressed with you. He said, I'll make the call and just see what he says. And unfortunately for you Ipswich fans and yourself, the phone call went well. I had to make a decision there and then. And I rang my wife and said, look, I'm going to travel up to Sunderland and have a chat. What do you think? And her and even my mum said, look, I think it's probably the best that you get away from the area. To get over your dad, new surroundings. So that was it. I packed my car up, drove to Sunderland the next morning, and the rest is history. So I apologise to the Ipswich fans, but yes, I was very, very close to joining.
And there are Ipswich in the wrong place at the wrong time yet again.
Yeah.
The Masters at it. Right. So off you go to Sunderland. So 4th of November, 97, 15 games have been played. Sunderland are 12th. You've got 4 goals. And then I did my maths, and hopefully I've got this right. In the remaining league and cup games, you scored 29 goals in 33 games. Sunderland go 12th to 3rd. Absolutely ludicrous output. Now, do you put this down to you always knew you were good enough, you knew what you were doing, you just needed to be in favourable circumstances and this was going to happen? Or were you even a bit surprised? Maybe you reached a different level that was above the expectations?
Yeah, listen, I'm not going to say here and say I wasn't surprised. Of course, you know, when you go to a new club, you see it now. How often does it take players to settle in? It can take them a good while. And you know what you just read out there. 4 goals up until I think you said November, where we were in the league. We didn't start well. I remember the turning point. I think we played Reading away and we got smashed 4-1. And the walk back to the bus that day, the supporters had gathered in there. I wouldn't say they're hundreds, but they weren't far off 100, throwing their shirts, their season tickets at the players. And all hell was breaking loose because they were unhappy. And Peter Reid, at that point, as good managers do, he had to do something. And I think he changed the team around at that stage. He brought in players that probably were sitting on the fringes, and he tried something different. And from that moment, you know, we just went on a roll, and, you know, I found my scoring boots. And of course, you know, Big Noel coming back from his career-threatening cruciate injury was a massive boost for the club and myself. And I always felt I could score goals. I've always said that. I always had the confidence I do. But you can't score goals without having players around you that create opportunities. I wasn't one of those strikers like a Thierry Henry who could come into his own half, turn, get the ball, dribble past 3 or 4 players with his pace and then finish it. You know, I wasn't that type of player. I needed chances created for me. Of course, I could, you know, in and around the box, I'd create my own opportunities. But we changed some personnel and it just worked and we just clicked. And, you know, one of our biggest advantages was the Stadium of Light. You know, once we got going there, it was a fortress. And, you know, it might sound like a myth, but it certainly isn't. You ask any of the Manchester United players, when you stood in the tunnel at Old Trafford as an away player, at times you're defeated before you even got on the pitch because you just knew what was coming. And we had that fear factor at the Stadium of Light. And of course, with me and Noel striking up the partnership that we did, you know, was an awesome one. So I was slightly surprised, but, you know, when I analyse it now, I always felt I could score that.
I've been watching
them goals. Maybe not that many.
I've been watching a lot of your goals this morning, and I'm struggling to get my head round instinct versus practice here, because when you were describing yourself earlier, I would think explosive and ruthless, yeah? And when I see the explosive part, I think he's playing off the cuff there. But then when I see where the ball actually goes into the net, I'm like, this looks too deliberate for that. Can you talk to me about what is the ratio here between you knowing exactly what you're going to do and having practiced it a million times and playing off the cuff? Because you scored all different types of goals in that season.
Yeah, you know, that's one of the biggest questions that I get asked as a striker, and I think any striker that's, you know, played at the highest level gets asked, you know, what's the difference between, you know, a top striker and a mediocre striker in terms of instinct. You know, how do you teach instinct? Are you born with it? I believe, you know, in my opinion, that you're born with it. You know, you can work on it, but I just think, you know, people at times have asked me, what were you doing in that situation at that time? And I can honestly say, I don't know. I just, you know, I read the game. I just believed, you know, it didn't come off every time. Don't get me wrong. I wasn't always right, but you always try to put yourself in positions where you think the ball's going to land and try and anticipate before the defender and get there before him. And then it's about composure. But, you know, I think, you know, in the terms of some of the goals, yeah, you're right. I always remember, for me, and it's stuck in my head to this day. And whenever I talk to young strikers about the art of scoring goals, I always remember my dad saying to me what Jimmy Greaves quoted years and years and years ago, was you'll score more goals by passing the ball in the back of the net than you will by smashing it in the back of the net. And for me, that's stood true throughout my career, because I think when you look at a lot of my goals, I'm passing it in the net with the inside of my foot. Yeah, there's the odd one that you'll use your laces where you smash it from 20, 25 yards. But a lot of them are finding the bottoms of the corners. And that comes through practice. And that comes through repetition on the training ground, day in and day out. 20 minutes after training every day. 20 minutes during training if there's a finishing session. So there is that part of the game. But I think instinct for me, I don't know whether I could coach that. You can coach, as every good striker coach or any good coach will, the art of getting in front, getting at the front post, going to the middle of the goal and going to the back post. They're 3 runs that you teach a young kid to do. And then it's about the timing. That's the way I would describe the way that I score goals.
You mentioned Niall Quinn. I'm just thinking about today's football and one central striker and 2 narrow inverted striker. I'm sure you'd be absolutely fine as the one central striker. Where would someone like Niall Quinn, how would he be used today when there's not many front 2s?
Yeah, well, I actually think Niall, it's amazing when we talk about Niall, people forget, and when you actually watch the goals he scored and the way he played, he was very, very good with his feet. I was lucky enough to play obviously with Niall, and I had a season with Peter Crouch, two of the tallest strikers, we've seen in the Premier League. And they, for such big men, they were so agile and nimble on their feet, and they had quick feet as well. So I actually think Niall would have no problem in today's game playing that lone striker, because you knew if the ball went up to him, it was sticking, and he could bring other players into the game, as you rightly say, those inverted strikers, maybe those 2 advanced midfield players who were running on. He had the art of being able to flick it on, hold it up, or bring other players into play. So I actually think, Niall wouldn't have a problem in today's game. Crouchy didn't have a problem when, that lone striker was brought in more and more, towards the back end of Crouchy's career, and certainly at Liverpool at times. But I think our partnership just worked. I was always told, the only one bit of information I was told when I played with Noel from Peter Reid and Niall himself was, just don't ever be 15 yards ever further away from me, whether that's in front of you or you're running in behind. And that was it. There wasn't a lot else that went on the training ground, believe it or not.
Right, we've got to talk about the playoffs now. And don't worry, in about 15 questions time, we're going to pay this off and there's going to be a lovely happy ending, but there's a few disappointments first off. So obviously the famous 4-4 here. I doing my research, it said something about a muscle strain in the semi-final. Now, you score, obviously, because it was a game for Sunderland in the 90s, but you put Sunderland 2-1 up, and Niall Quinn put Sunderland 3-2 up, and you go off, injured, I take it. If you'd been fully healthy, would you A, have taken a penalty in the shootout, or B, would it have been less likely to go to penalties if you'd have stayed on?
Blimey, we got a crystal ball in hindsight.
Yeah, right.
Isn't that a great thing? But I suppose when I look back and I think about that playoff final, I had mixed emotions during, before, and after the game for various reasons. But obviously, the Sheffield United game in the second leg of the playoff, when I got the winner, I picked up a dead leg. Quite a bad knee into the side of my leg, and as any footballer knows, when you get that, it's so painful. And I know we had 10 days from the second leg of the playoffs to the final, so I had plenty of time to recover, but I wasn't able to do a lot of training. I didn't train probably for the first 5, 6, 7 days. Then we went away for a bit of team bonding, as Peter Reid would have called it. So you could imagine what one of Peter Reid's team bonding sessions were. It was a couple of days on the
Some adult beverage were consumed.
Correct. So in hindsight, I should have probably been a little bit more professional and probably not enjoyed it. But I was young, things were, I was very much in the limelight at the time. People were speaking about me, so you get carried away. And we played on a Tuesday night, I think, and that was at the weekend straight after. And then we had a week to prepare for the bank holiday Monday. And as I say, I probably didn't train till the Thursday before the Monday game. So as every player will tell you who's played at Wembley on the big pitch on a hot sunny day, it's grueling. And if you're not 100% fit, you're going to find it difficult. So I actually had to come off with cramp. which is the most frustrating thing ever to have to do.
Did you feel all right otherwise?
Yeah, it was just
Yeah.
cramp that got me off the pitch. Yeah, no, I didn't have any strain. There was no muscle tear. It was just pure the fact it was cramp. And, as every player, you try and take your electrolytes, your gels that you get then, your Lucozade on the side of the pitch, but it just wasn't happening. And believe me, if I could have stayed on the pitch, I would have stayed on. And of course, would it have gone to penalties? I'd like to think that I would, if I was fully fit and the team we had with the way the game was going. I think it could have been maybe a hat-trick each between me and Clive on the day. But no, it wasn't to be, and I have to sit and watch. Of course, I would have took a penalty. I probably would have took the first penalty. To sit and watch it and watch, the players go through what they did. And, of course, Michael Gray having to experience what he did, it was heartbreaking. And so, yeah, they was my mixed emotions on the day.
It's a horrible list, isn't it? 90 points, playoff final, extra time. Charlton hadn't conceded a goal in 9 games before that, and you put 4 past them. 6 out of 7 penalties. This feels rather unlucky, doesn't it? Is it possibly the best team not to be promoted?
On them stats, you would have to say yes. With that points haulage, with their team, like you rightly said, going into the playoffs, haven't conceded. And we put 4 past them, and and that was without their top scorer for half an hour of the game to go. So, listen, at the end of the day, I think there was some poor mistakes from defenders on both teams. I remember sitting on the dugout next to our assistant manager, Bobby Saxon, and he was very much defensive minded, and he was pulling his hair out. And all I remember him saying, he was shouting over to Alan Kirbishley on the day, was just tell your players to kick it straight down the middle. He said, you'll score every time. He said, we're useless at defending. And I couldn't quite believe what I was hearing. But they were a young back 4 in our side at the time. But you would have to say, yeah, it certainly goes down for me as the best playoff final of all time, just because of the stats you rightly said, and the amount of penalties that it took.
We go into the next season and the team stays together. You have an injury, but it's HMS, the league. Only 26 appearances, but still 23 goals. So the output is still incredible. And you get called up for England whilst playing in the second tier, which is quite the achievement. Talk to me about the significance of getting the call, and is this something that's actually going to happen in the future? Now you see academies having players from 13 and all the big clubs hoarding them, and then they go through the age system, and it feels like England players are preordained from about 10 years prior. And even your namesake, Calvin Phillips, they waited until he was in the Premier League before the call-up. Sorry, that was a waffly double question, but the significance, do you think it's going to happen much in the future?
I think it will. I just think with the way football is at the moment, in terms of recruitment as well, I think just going even further down the pyramid, I think clubs will be looking into the non-league area just purely for finances. Certainly the lower league clubs, and then bringing players through that way. But I think England's DNA now, their philosophy that Gareth's brought, that they're not afraid to give players, no matter what league they're in. Of course, they probably wouldn't go any lower than the Championship. That's for certain. But any young player now that's performing week in and week out at a team in the Championship side, Gareth's already shown that he's not afraid to put them into that squad and bring them in early. Not over flog them, but just give them a taste of what it's like. Give them that bit of experience. Then you hope that they go and develop even more, maybe get promoted with their side and then perform in the Premier League. And Calvin's a classic example. Of course, it happened to myself all those years ago with me and Michael Gray. And I think we were the first 2 players ever to be brought into an England squad from, the second tier. So, it was an amazing experience. And, did I expect it? No, I probably didn't. Was I expecting it that week of the game? I kind of was, because there was a lot of talk of it, and even Peter Reid said to me, keep your phone on you at all times. He said, because you could be getting a surprise call this week, and for me that he obviously he pretty much gave it away to me, and I just couldn't wait for that call. But it was an amazing experience in terms of the domestic season that season. 23 goals in 26 games. You know, and that was with missing 3 months of the season as well, which I picked up a crazy injury.
What were you doing playing in a League Cup first round game? They wouldn't put you anywhere near that nowadays, would they?
And whenever you speak to Peter Reid about him, when we do after dinner talks, it still, you know, bites him now. He was adamant. He was adamant he didn't want me to play, but you know, as every striker, I was flying at the time, and I think it was Chesterfield at home. I just felt that I could go and get a few goals and goals and. You know, I probably shouldn't have played, but it cost me. Didn't cost us in the long run because we got promoted. But I firmly believe if I hadn't got injured, I would have scored more than 35 as I did in my first season at Sunderland. I could have broke the 40-goal barrier, no problem whatsoever. But you know, we still managed to destroy the league and win it comfortably. And then, like you said, you know, to top it off, you know, to get an England cap was an unbelievable season.
There you go. You were well rested for the European Golden Shoe the next season, then, weren't you?
Yeah.
So it's the Premier League years now, which we're going to scoot through. But 7 years at the top with Sunderland and the amazing 30-goal season in the Premier League. Even eight less games to do it up there. Southampton and Villa. So great years up there. You're now 33. And I'm going to sign for West Brom. This is 2006. What helps you make a decision to drop a level? You see a lot of players, and they gradually play less games, and you know they get used more fleetingly, and then they retire. You obviously didn't want to do that, and you came back down to the Championship. What's the thinking?
Well, the thinking was, I didn't want to leave. We'd done a lot of moving. You know, when I left Sunderland, we went down to Southampton, the other end of the country. You know, a young family. We'd only been there 2 seasons. Then we moved again up to the Midlands. And I just wanted a base for the children to grow up. I didn't want to keep moving.
How old are they now?
They would have been, I think my eldest one at that time would have been about 8 or 9.
So primary school.
And then the twins, you know, they were about 3 or 4 at the time. So, you know, I think I just felt it was time for them to, certainly the older one, to just find some roots and for ourselves. And, you know, it was, of course, when I left Southampton, I came to Villa, and then did the free, you know, I did the Villa, did Villa. Then I went to West Brom, of course, and then to Birmingham. So it was, I think it was just pure of a case that I didn't want to particularly leave the area. I wanted to find roots. And, you know, I did have an opportunity at the end of my 2 years at West Brom where I pretty much agreed to go back to Sunderland when Noel Quinn took over. But when I actually thought about it and sat down and spoke to my family, you know, that would have been another 2-3 years in the Midlands, then would have been on the move again. So I just thought, no, it wasn't right. And I didn't want to go back to a club where I'd done so well, just in case it didn't work out. So, you know, I opted for the Premier League down to West Brom. And at that time, they had Brian Robson in charge and Nigel Pearson and Craig Shakespeare at the club. They had some great players. And I felt it was the right move. And, you know, I think when you look at the stats from my personal side of it and, you know, what we did as a club, getting to the FA Cup semi-final, getting to the playoff final, then getting promoted the following season quite comfortably, it turned out to be the right decision.
Can you tell me, because you've done it twice now, we see some teams, and you mentioned the kind of eerie similarity of the missing out in the playoff final. This is playoff final number 2 now for West Brom against Derby County, but then coming back the next year to win the division. And you get 22 goals that season and Championship Player of the Year again. So the similarities are just mind-boggling, you know, years later. What helps a team not go to pieces after a playoff? Because you did it twice there, having the misery, but then actually improving. What's the deal?
Yeah, I think it's having a strong dressing room. I think when I look back and I analyse that squad and I look at it, Tony Mowbray was brought in when Brian Robson left, and you know it was a big surprise for us as players, and I think a lot of people in the media. But I have to say he was outstanding from day one. You know, you think a big, tall centre half. I played against him actually when he was coming towards the end of his career, and he was a no nonsense centre half. So we all thought, here we go, it's just going to be back to front, route one football, long ball game, but it wasn't. You know, he surprised everyone. He wanted us to play out from the back. He wanted ball players, and he was outstanding. But you know, going back to your question, I think it's having a strong dressing room. You know, I remember when we in the dressing room at Wembley after the Sunderland Charlton game. Once the manager said his piece, a couple of the senior players stood up and just said their part and basically said, look, what we're going to do, there's nothing we can do about it now. It's over, it's done. Yeah, it's going to hurt for a bit. But what we do is we come back pre-season, we don't talk about it. We keep the core players together if we can. That's down to the management. We add to it. And if we can start the season well and stick together, we know we've got a squad that's well capable of getting promoted. And it worked. And it was the same at West Brom. We had some experienced players in there. We had Johnny Artson, we had Chris Perry, we had myself, who'd been around a while. We had Paul Robinson, the left back. We had Jonathan Green, who, you know, who's won a Champions League medal with Manchester United. And coupled with younger players, we had Jason Kumas, you know, who'd been around a good while. Coupled with a lot of, you know, younger players that were brought in. You know, it was the mentality side of the play, the dressing room being strong. And, you know, that for me was the difference between going up and not going up.
We mentioned the similarities. So can you compare the 35-year-old Kevin Phillips with because it's only one goal difference. Okay, you were injured for half the season in 98, 99. How are you a different player? The result seems the same, but you must have got there a slightly different way. What's improved and what's different now from the 26-year-old that was getting promoted and the 35-year-old?
Do you know what? Not a lot. Not a lot. I actually felt fitter as I was getting older. And, you know, as amazing as it seemed, you know, I maybe because I came into the game a little bit later than most people when I was 20, 21, you know, I'd missed those early years. So I was probably still, you know, I felt fresh. I looked after myself off the pitch. I had a great manager in Tony Mowbray, who looked after me in terms of occasionally giving me an extra day off or letting me have an extra session off, just to keep me, you know, fresh for the weekend. And, you know, I go back to, you have to have players around you that are going to create opportunities. And I was lucky enough to have that in the squad. But you still have to find that drive yourself. You still have to have that enthusiasm. And I had it in bundles because, you know, the later it was getting at 35, you know, you kind of almost thinking your career hasn't got much, you know, long left. I want to enjoy it as much as I can, but I don't know, you know, I felt as fit as then as I did when I, you know, got the 23 for Sunderland. So, you know, I'm not going to pat myself on the back, but I think as an individual and as a professional, you know, if you look after yourself, you know, you can play a lot longer than you actually think you can. And using the resources that every football club now can only help. And I certainly did that. So when you look, I suppose, when you analyse the types of goals I scored for West Brom and what I did in that second season at Sunderland, they're all pretty much the same. Like I said earlier, I didn't always go for power. I always went to try and place it in the back of the net. And, you know, it doesn't matter how old you are. You know, I probably feel I could still do it now because it's just finding the corners of the goals.
Sure. Here comes promotion number 3 now, Birmingham City. It feels like now you're getting brought in as much for your goals as you are. Everyone says how hard the Championship is. And here's this guy that just serially is getting promoted out of it. Are you now being lent on by the other players, maybe even the people above you, to say, right, this Championship, you seem to be bossing this fairly. Is it your knowledge as much as your goals that's getting used by the time you're at Birmingham?
Yeah, well, of course, you know, at the time you go down 30, 35 or 36, you know, Alex McLeish, you know, I was very surprised because, of course, I didn't want to leave West Brom at the time, and it was well documented. I was looking for a 2-year contract. They would only give me 1, and it never happened. So, but when I spoke to Alex McLeish and Sullivan and Gold and Brady, who were in charge of the club at the time, you know, when McLeish said that he wanted me to sign, and we said, look, we're after a 2-year deal, believe it or not, the board didn't hesitate. So, you know, they'd obviously realised that this player is going to bring something that can help, because they just got relegated, that could help us, you know, get back to the Premier League. And, you know, with my previous history of doing that, you know, and obviously at the stage of my career with the experience, the knowledge, you know, it kind of all stacked up in their favour. And, you know, it perhaps my 3 years at Birmingham, I loved it. And I still love the football club and go back as much as I can. But there's still a hint of frustration that I didn't play as many games as I'd liked. But still managed to get promoted in the first, still managed to score on my debut coming off the bench and getting the winner against Sheffield United. Remember it as clear as day. And then still remember scoring the winning goal on the last day of the season to get us promoted. So, you know, it was an amazing first season, but the 2 seasons in the Premier League were a bit frustrated because I still felt that I could do more than what I was being used.
So you're just showing no signs of retiring here. Age 38 now, off to Blackpool. There's a big theme that you just mentioned. You nearly stole my thunder. Newly relegated teams. So Sunderland were newly relegated when you went, and so were West Brom, Birmingham, and Blackpool. Some people wouldn't want to go near that, would they? They'd be thinking, "Oh, this team's just been poorly performing." Was that never an issue for you, going to sort of 3 or 4 teams who've just been relegated?
No, never. For me, it's the opposite, because you kind of think, obviously, with the parachute payments, you know, most clubs with common sense are going to try, and of course, there's going to be players within that ranks. You know, the top players are going to want to move on and stay in the Premier League, which is natural. You know, it happened to me. I got relegated out of the Premier League 3 times, and your natural instinct is I want to stay in the Premier League. So, yeah, it was never an issue, because I knew that, you know, once I'd spoken to Iain Holloway and Alex McLeish and Peter Reid, and Brian Robson at the time, you know, that they were all of the same conversation, was that we're going to try and keep hold of the core of the squad, use the parachute payments to replace the players that are going to leave, and we're going to have a right go at it, which every team does. The first season you get relegated, they throw money at it and try and come back as quickly as possible. And, you know, once I spoke to Iain Holloway and his enthusiasm for the game, and, you know, it just fitted, you know, and I'd have to say the first season there was just, you know, for me, it was outstanding. I think I finished top goal scorer there at the age I was at 38. We get to the playoff final. I wasn't meant to start the playoff final, but Gary Taylor Fletcher got injured the day before, and then I got chucked in to start the playoff final at my age. So, yeah, it was a bizarre season. We absolutely battered and dominated West Ham on the day, but we just couldn't get those goals. So, yeah, it was never an issue about joining a club that had just come out of the Premier League. It was quite the opposite, to be honest.
Holloway, from the outside, what is it about this guy? He comes across as, I don't want to be polite because obviously you've worked with him a load, but he comes across as just this crazy ball of energy, doesn't he? Is there more to it than that? What is it? Motivation? And I'd love to see him actually work.
The biggest thing for me is, Ollie, yeah, he's crackers. But one thing he's so passionate about football, and he's so knowledgeable about football. It's quite incredible. You know, in my career, I played under 21 managers. He was probably at the top of that in terms of his enthusiasm for the game, his enthusiasm for being on the training ground day in and day out. Probably sometimes overdid it, and wouldn't say bored the players, but sometimes, you know, as players, your attention span isn't very, very long. And, you know, when you're sat on the training ground for 2-3 hours, you can quite easily switch off. But his love for the game was just so infectious. And, you know, he got the best out of his players. And one of the biggest things for me as any manager, you look forward to going into training each day, because you never knew what you was going to get with him. You know, some days we wouldn't even train. We would come in, he would just say, "Get back in your cars, follow me, we're going to the CAF." He said, "We're going for a full English breakfast." And he said, "And then you can go." And that was it. You know, things were off the cuff.
So you like that eccentricity?
Yeah. Well, and that's exactly what he was. But I think for players, you know, when you mix it up and you do stuff like that, you kind of give the manager a lot of respect. Of course, as long as you're not doing it all the time. But the big thing is he knew his football, and he knew his philosophy, his type of football he wanted to play. It was a 4-3-3, week in and week out, and it worked that first season. You know, we managed to get to the playoff final, and we're very unlucky that in that final not to win it.
And that's probably of all the playoff finals you played in, the one where you're going in as the underdog against West Ham, who some teams in the Championship they're just kind of too big for it, and they just kind of force their way through. Was that the overriding thing with that playoff final against the other ones? I know obviously you're professional sportsman, incredibly competitive, but that feels like I feel the other two you're a bit unlucky and you were favourites and didn't quite get through, but whereas this one was a bit more of a David Goliath type thing, right?
Yeah, of course. Look at the size of the clubs, but you can't approach it. You leave other people to think like that. But we're not daft. We know that they had obviously Sam Allardyce in charge at the time. They had some top players, playing that day that had huge experience of the Premier League, international players as well. So we knew that it was going to be a tough game. But that I'll go back to Ian Holloway. He weren't interested in that. It didn't bother him one little bit, and he made it very clear to us as players. We try to approach it in the same way as we did every other game, but it's difficult, to do that. I was lucky enough that I played at Wembley a few times before that, so it wasn't a big thing for me. But for some of them players who had never experienced, a full house at Wembley in the richest game in football, it can take its toll. But when you actually watch the game, I think if Matty Phillips would have had his scoring boots on, certainly in the first half, we could have been 3-0 up and the game could have been out of sight. But it just wasn't to be, and right you say, they took their chances when they come, and would I say they deserved to win it? No, they didn't. But you do deserve to win it if you take your chances, and that's what West Ham did on the day. So it was, for me, out of all the finals, that was probably the most hardest to take.
Well, I said we were going to pay off the playoff final story in a nice way, because you're going to start the season age 39 with Blackpool and Ian Holloway, but you're both going to end up at Palace by the end of the season. And finally, you're going to win a playoff final. This great career with all these goals, and amazingly, you're going to score the winning goal. And I watched the footage of this back, and you must have been thinking, "I'm never going to win a playoff final," because the Watford goalkeeper Almunia is having a bit of a worldie, and Glenn Murray is not playing, and I don't think Aaron Wilbraham had his best day from the highlights I saw with his finishing. Glenn Murray got 30 goals that season as well. So let's just go through this moment, because it's absolutely brilliant. You're pushing 40 at this point in your fourth playoff final. This is why football is just great, because if you wrote this narrative, it would be too far-fetched, wouldn't it? And you're going to come back. Interestingly, with Wilf Zaha as well, winning the penalty, who was the last player to be called up from the second tier to play for England, like you did. There had been an issue with penalties, I read, at Sunderland, where you'd actually stopped taking them for a while, but you look very, very, what's the word, focused and single-minded when this penalty's given. Can you just paint the picture after, because this story lasts 15 years of you in playoff finals, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. And I think, when I joined Palace, they were flying at the top of the league. I think we were second at the time. And, when they come in, they had the chance to go and work again with Ollie. And I saw, where Palace were, my thinking was another promotion on my CV. It's a no-brainer. So, it happened, I think, on the last day of the transfer window. So it was out of the blue, actually. And I had to make a decision quick, and it was a no-brainer. Yeah, I got myself down there under Ollie, working with him, and things weren't going particularly well. And at one point, it looked like we were going to struggle to get in the playoffs. And I think it was only probably on the last day that we snuck into the playoffs against. I think we relegated Peterborough, and I think I scored the winning goal to relegate Peterborough, which isn't nice. But yeah. And then we go, we play the playoffs against our local rivals, if you want to call them local, when they're 30 miles away in Brighton, which was crazy. I couldn't understand. But yeah, we lost Glenn in that first leg, and, he done his crew shirt, and we were all gutted and disappointed. And you automatically thought then our chances were over. Your 30 goal strikers missing. I'm touching 40. Could I really replicate what Glenn had done? Maybe 10 years, well, not 10 years ago, maybe 5 years ago I would have done it. But we go to the away leg, and Wilf turns up on the night, and he was unbelievable. We turned Brighton over, and we get to the final. And part of me, of course, was absolutely buzzing that we'd got to the final. And I was for Ian Holloway as well, because he'd suffered a bit of stick from the media. But my own personal feeling was, I don't want to play in it. I don't want to be a part of it, because I just
Number
knew what
4.
was, number 4. And I just thought, I've experienced 3 losses, and people always kept telling me that the best way to go up is through the playoff final. And I just thought, that's untrue, because 1, I'd never experienced it. And 3, losing at Wembley, it isn't a place for losers. It's terrible. And, it's an awful way to finish a season, a long, hard season. So delighted, but also anxious. So when the final obviously come round, Aaron Wilbraham started the game. Of course, I never even dreamt that I would start the game. And you're right, Aaron, again, like Matty Phillips in the West Brom game, if he'd have had his scoring boots on again, the game could have been over early. But it was, you kind of almost keep going on and thinking, is it going to be one of those days again? We lost Dicker Choi, who's been one of our best midfield players of the season. O'Keefe had to come on, and I have to say, did an amazing job. But they also had their problems. Watford, they lost Matty Vidra at half-time, and, he was their main threat. But we just kept plugging away. And when you've always got someone like a Will Sahar in your side, you've always got an opportunity of creating something out of nothing. And obviously when Ollie said, get ready and get on the pitch, I think there was still 20 minutes or half an hour of the game left.
65 you were on.
So there was still plenty of time for me to affect the game. And obviously when it went into extra time and that Wilf went down the left, and as a defender, when Wilf fronts you up in the box, I wouldn't know what it was like. I'm assuming I'd be scared, because you just don't know what he's going to do. And at times I felt that Wilf didn't even know what he was going to do. So he was very unpredictable. But I think the penalty was a no-brainer. It was a stonewall penalty. And when that whistle went, I don't know what it was, but I felt great. I felt great. I felt composed. I just thought,
is that one you had planned, Kevin? The high one to the keeper's right?
Yeah. Yeah, I generally always took my penalties that side, and as soon as a penalty was given, I went for the ball. And I think there was only one player, I can't remember who it was, who tried to ask if he could take it, and he got a swift, I don't like to swear, and I'm not going to swear, but he got a swift, no, you're not. I'm taking it. And when I put the ball down, I don't know what it was. I've taken, like you said, many. As you said earlier, I went for a period at Sunderland where I missed 4 on the bounce, and I stopped taking them for a bit. And I wouldn't say I was a fantastic penalty taker for some reason or not, but I just felt right. It just felt right on the day, whether it was because it was against the club where it all started. Was this possibly going to be, the last goal of my career? Was I going to retire at the end of the game? Because I'd already had it in my mind that if things went well, and I'd already dreamt that if I got the winning goal, I could possibly announce my retirement. So I just felt right. And, as soon as the ball went on the spot, I had it in my mind. And I have to say, it was probably one of the sweetest penalties I hit in my whole career. And, the goalkeeper had absolutely no chance of saving it. And
they've got the lovely shot, Kevin, the camera on the rope. So we get to see from behind you with your run up. And you get to see us mere mortals don't realise how big the keepers are as well.
Well, they are. Some keepers can make the goal look tiny, but on that day, the goal looked big to me, and I knew exactly where I wanted to put it. And as I say, as soon as it left my foot, I knew it was going into the top corner. And I actually didn't realise that camera was on the ropes during the game, because you're so focused. And when I watched it back, it's just it's an awesome picture to watch even to this day. And I think you saw in my celebrations, they were fairly muted, because, as I always did throughout my career, whether you want to argue or not, I wasn't one that liked to rub it in my fellow, clubs. But there was an air of celebration, more relief. And then it was just, can we hold on? And I have to say to Watford, they give it all in the last 5 minutes. They had one cleared off the line, and, he was just praying and praying and praying that, for that ref to blow the whistle, because I wanted to experience what it was like to win a playoff final. And I have to say, when that final whistle went, everyone that had told me over the years that it's the best way to go up.
Now you agree, yeah.
Now I agree with them, because it was. And, I'd have to say the party that night was some party.
I think a fairly well-deserved playoff victory for you with that 15-year story. I find it really interesting, this retirement thing, because just talking to you, you seem so sort of focused and like I'm sure you plan things out and know exactly what you're going to do. You talk about your practicing, your finishing. I was so surprised when you said, "Oh, I might retire if it goes well or not." That from chatting to you for this last time, that surprises me. You kind of left it that you might make a spontaneous decision just based on gut feeling.
Yeah, I think it was. Before the game, I spoke to my family, and it was one of those really that if it went well, what else could I achieve in my football career? I'd won individual medals. I was lucky enough to win, the League Cup with Birmingham. I played for my country. Now I've tasted a playoff final win, which I hadn't in my three previous. Of course, I'd experienced 3 relegations from the Premier League. So I'd experienced everything. I had virtually half my career in the Championship, half in the Premier League. So I just felt, could it get any better than winning the playoff final and taking a club to the Premier League? So it was one of those decisions that when I got interviewed at the end of the game with me and Will Sahar, it was, and when you actually watch the interview, and I watch it now, when Wilf is talking, I'm actually talking to myself in my head, shall I or shan't I? Yeah, it was. I had the little, some little devil here, and the one here saying do it, and one was saying don't do it. There's still life in you. And I think, I can't remember what point it would have been. It must have been when they started talking to me. I kind of almost forgot about it because of the excitement, enjoyment. I could see my family. We actually did it not far from where I could see my family. And I just thought, and I always think back to when managers and players have always said, keep going until you can't go no more, and unless you stop loving the game and you don't still get the same buzz, which I did. If your legs can keep going and you still got that enthusiasm, go as long as you can, because it's a long time retired. And I'm glad I made the decision not to announce my retirement then. And luckily enough, the end of that following season was another promotion. So I think I made the right decision.
Yeah, that fell into your lap, didn't it? So you'd mentioned Nigel Pearson and Craig Shakespeare before. This must have been the easiest deal to do in your life, going to Leicester in January 2014, 4 points clear at the top of the table with a 5th promotion up for grabs. I just wanted to, you've kind of touched on this. I just wanted to talk about David Nugent, because he's in that squad there. And when you didn't sign for Ipswich, we signed a player called David Johnson, who I'm sure you played against, a good friend, actually. Yeah. These two were guys that bullied the Championship, but for some reason didn't either get the chance or when they did score goals at the top level. Now, obviously, they're fellow professionals. I'm talking about a Dwight Gale or a Lewis Grabban or, this ilk of player. Why do you get these Championship specialists that either don't get a chance or maybe, no offence to any of them, can't take the chance at the top level, like you did?
Yes, it's always a tough one, isn't it? Because I never ever want to criticize. Yeah, I know. Yeah, it's a tough one to answer. It's all about the individual. I would never ever, criticise an ex-player because I know how difficult it is. And, something when you go to the Premier League, there's more pressure on you. And some players, just can't handle that pressure. There's something in their mind that triggers, different emotions when you're presented with an opportunity in front of goal. And similar scenario when I've trained with some unbelievable players over the years, but when it comes to match day, they're just a totally different player. They can't handle that pressure. So I was very lucky. I felt that I thrived on pressure, no matter what league I played in. And you mentioned 2 players, like you say, their record at the Championship level was fantastic, but the Premier League, maybe that step too far. I don't know. You'd have to ask the player yourself, but I can only imagine that if you was to probably sit and analyse their chances when they played in the Premier League, they might be snatching at it, they might be rushing it, not showing that composure that you would in the Championship, because generally those when you talk of those 2 players, they would have played in Championship teams where you're not worried if you miss an opportunity because that you're probably going to get another 2 or 3 because you're playing in a team that's dominating it. And I probably I'm not going to single myself out from the two guys, because Nuge actually has done something that I haven't done, and he scored for his country.
It didn't even hit the net, did it?
Nah, well, it doesn't matter. He still scored. It's like golf, isn't it? If you get a par four, there's no pictures on the scorecard. So he's got that notch on. He's got that goal, and which I never managed to do. But yeah, he's a top lad anyway. I managed to obviously play and work with him. But yeah, there's all different kinds of emotions why players don't score in the Premier League, and I think one of the biggest ones is you snatch at your opportunities, because you very rarely get one or two more opportunities in those games.
So that's it for the career. 102 points with Leicester. So I'm sure you've been asked this a million times. I need you to compare the Sunderland. So Sunderland got 3 more points actually in '99 than Leicester, and you have the caveat that Schmeichel, Morgan, Mahrez, Drinkwater, Vardy are going to go on and win the Premier League. Although Sunderland, with your 30-goal season, finished 7th as well, didn't they? So, which is the better team from your unique perspective on this?
I've got to have to say Sunderland, aren't I? Because we got more points.
Yeah.
It's plus, it's a club that I spent 6 years at and have a real affiliation with, of course. So I'm going to say Sunderland, but nevertheless, that team that I walked into in January at Leicester, I didn't make a huge impact. I think I scored an important goal away at Bournemouth when we won 1-0, which was a big, I wouldn't say a turning point, but really kicked on from there and walked the rest of the season. But yeah, they had some great players, and who was to know that we're going to go on and win the Premier League 2 years later, because obviously that following season when I went onto the coaching side, we were dead and buried at Christmas, and we found some form, survived, and then they win the Premier League. So incredible, achievement for them guys. But yeah, for me, sitting here now, it would have to be the 99-2000 season. Sorry, the 98-99 season for Sunderland with 105 points, and in front of that crowd as well, 40-odd thousand people every other week was just phenomenal.
Just quickly on Leicester, what were your thoughts when you saw Vardy? Because he's obviously gone on to score, I think, over 100 Premier League goals. Now, did you spot any similarities? What were the shooting drills like with you two training together?
Yeah, it's funny actually, because I use that phrase with Jamie. But one of the biggest things, obviously played with him for that for 3 or 4 months at the end of the season. One of the biggest things that I saw, he was very erratic. Everything was 100 mile an hour in terms of, of course, his pace, his closing down, everything he did was 100 mile an hour, and off the pitch as well. He was just such a hyperactive guy, but a good lad as well, top lad in the dressing room. And, when I went onto the coaching side of it and analysed his game, part of my thoughts were, and my coaching skills were going to be...
Calm down.
Calm down, exactly. Because he put himself in so many great situations, one-on-ones with the keepers because of his pace. He's half a yard of pace that he could score a lot of. I could see him scoring a lot of goals if he just calmed down, he composed himself a bit more, and like I did when we pretty much opened up our conversation, what Jimmy Greaves said: can you pass the ball in the net? Can you find those corners instead of smashing everything as hard as you can? And I'm not going to say I'm going to take, whether he wants to give me any credit or anybody wants to give me credit. But I think when you look at his goals he scores now, very rarely does he smash it now. He finds the corners. He passes everything in the back of the net now, and he shows great composure. Of course, that comes with age as well. He's 30 now. And, as you get older, you calm down a little bit more in your lifestyle as well. So there's a combination of things, but certainly I saw a huge change in Jamie Vardy from the player that I played with and coached early on to the player he is now. And I have to say he's been phenomenal for the last 5-6 years.
Amazing. So to summarise this then, Kevin, in the Championship, you spent 10 seasons, you won it 3 times, promoted 5 times, scored the winner in the playoff final, lost in the playoff final 3 times, relegated once with Watford, scored 150 goals, 150 in the Championship. You're obviously not going to sit here and call yourself the greatest, and I don't know whether anyone wants to be the greatest Championship player because it's the second tier, and obviously that's with the greatest respect to your achievements in the Premier League as well. Can you see anyone having a Championship career like that? It's incredible when you boil it down, isn't it?
It is, and you know what? I've never had anyone reel those stats off to me. So that's credit to you for doing your homework, and thanks for it as well. Because
Oh,
it's always
been
nice to.
it's been a joy. I've watched
Good.
two
It's always.
Sunderland season reviews this morning.
It's always nice to obviously hear the achievements that you made, and you don't really get to hear them or think about them until you retire. Obviously, I've been retired a good few seasons now, but it's still nice to hear people, say nice things about you. And yeah, listen, I wouldn't want to sit here and say I wouldn't want any player to go on and do better than me. Of course I would, because I love watching players succeed. That doesn't, there's nothing more than fills me with joy than watching players succeed, especially when they've come from the roots that I have. When I look at the Jamie Vardy story coming from non-league and doing what he's doing, it makes my heart feel warm. So yeah, I will remember those stats, because I'll probably use them now every now and then when I do some interviews.
It just feels so unique, though, the fact that you did so much of it after finishing in the Premier League, because obviously when you did it as a younger player, you're either going to be promoted or someone's going to take you out of the division with those numbers. Whereas when you're settling down your 3-4 children and not wanting to move, and you can accrue that achievement, I think it's a very, very kind of unique story. Two more, Kevin, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
What can a footballer learn from playing in the Championship specifically that they can take to the Premier League? A lot of people think it's a big car crash, Saturday, Tuesday. But what did you take from the Championship and that grind that actually maybe the Premier League players you're up against didn't have?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think, what you're saying in terms of the Saturday, Tuesday grind, there's not an awful lot of time to, reflect on your performances, reflect on the games, because you're pretty much preparing for other games. Whereas in the Premier League, it's pretty much Saturday, you'll get the odd midweek game. So you've got time to, I would advise any player, to reflect on your performance. As I said earlier, there's resources at every club now that you can pretty much look at every run that you make in the game. You can look at your heart rate. There's so much out there that can help your game. And, I think, I certainly was one of those players that, when I had time, I would reflect, I would watch the game, I would look at my stats. I certainly, for any striker out there, I would always re-watch my goals, not just from that season when it was, throughout my career, just to keep jogging, keep little reminders, of what you were good at. So I think the preparation really is one of the biggest things in the Premier League, because you've got a lot more time to do it.
Excellent. What's coming up for you? You've worked at Derby and at Stoke in recent times, and Leicester on the staff. What are the plans? Is it more coaching stuff, or are you looking at assistant manager work, or even higher up going forward?
Yeah, I think, of course, I experienced first team coach, and then, I'd say interim. Me and Chris Powell took over for a couple of games at Derby when Nigel Pearson went, and me and Shakespeare at Leicester before Ranieri come in. So I've had experience of, what it's like to organise a team for a game, and then obviously coaching. I've done the individual coaching, striker coach. So I've done a bit of everything. Listen, I've made it clear in public that when, the Sunderland job came up before Phil Parkinson, that I was very interested in applying, which I did. So I would love a crack at management, but I'm not daft. I know the longer it goes on, the tougher it will become. So at the moment, if an opportunity like that came up, or try to get back into coaching, I would certainly look at it. I was lucky enough to have an interview at a club 2 weeks ago for a first team coaching role that I just missed out on. So, but at the minute, I'm doing a fair bit of media, which I'm really enjoying. But ultimately, having played for.
When you're doing media, are you watching with your professional eye out of the corner, or do you get? Are you able to do work essentially? Are you analysing systems and tactics and looking at players, or does your time get absorbed with all this stuff that I'm doing with you right now?
No. I still get to do it. And I think in media, when you go and watch games, you need to have your coaching head on, because, You have to look at the tactics, the formations. When things change in the game, you need to be able to report that. So, it's, yeah, listen, I'm not going to say I'm inundated with media stuff. It's steady and it kind of suits my lifestyle at the moment. But ultimately, if a call was to come tomorrow, the next best thing, when a player retires, the next best thing to get that adrenaline and that buzz is to be on the training ground day in and day out with the players on the coaching side, because that's the next best thing. And, I haven't done it now for, a year, just over a year, and coming up 2 years actually in January when we left Stoke. And I have to say I've missed it. But I know how hard it is because there's so many ex-players and ex-coaches that are out there without a job. So do I see myself getting back in at any time soon? Probably not. So the media will probably be my route for the time being, which I thoroughly enjoy.
Brilliant. Kevin Phillips, thank you so much for joining us. I'm sure our subscribers, I don't really know where we go in terms of guests above this with all of those promotions, particularly from a championship thing. But thank you so much for your time.
You're welcome. Cheers.
Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button to see more videos from this channel. Hit the subscribe button and to be notified every time we upload. Ring the bell for those notifications to come through on your device. If you really want to support the channel and me as a content creator, I will be eternally grateful if you head over to the merch store and grab something, or support over on Patreon, patreon.com/Benjamin Bloom. Thank you for your time. Go and watch another video.